Hello, people of the internet. So I just finished, well, not just, I finished watching the movie Sinners. I watched it with my grandma and my brother. We did that yesterday. And it was pretty cool. And I wanted to make a review of it. So here it is. So it, one issue that I don't really know if it was a me problem or like an actual problem with the actors. I a lot of the times couldn't understand what they were saying. I understood enough to, watch the film, but like there were a good few lines that I couldn't quite understand. You know. There's a good few reasons why that could be on me, but there's also a good few reasons why that could be on on the actors. Um, so if it is on the actors, then yeah, it's on the actors. And take that as a criticism. But if it's just me, then it's just me. Go ahead and yeah. What was the other thing? Oh, what was it? One thing is it was really interesting because before I watched it, my brother told me it was a vampire movie, and during the beginning, I was like thinking to myself, well, I didn't even just think this. I said this to my grandma, that it is the least vampire movie ever because I didn't, obviously it was at a point before the vampires appeared, so it was weird to me, and I was like, I thought this was a vampire movie. And yeah, and then later you got to the point in the shack where the guy says that, tricks those people into letting him in. I liked the usage of the invitation only vampires, They can't come in on their own. They have to be allowed in. That's a thing that vampires have that is not very commonly used. And that's probably because it comes off as really strange, you know? Because a good question about it is like, what happens if they just ignore it and they just force themselves in? But that's just a vampire thing, so that's something I'm willing to suspend disbelief for. But I have always wondered what would happen if a vampire just forced themselves in, if they live, a vampire in a universe where they are only able to come in with an invitation. Yeah. I should probably summarize the movie so I can, you know, actually talk about it as a review. So, it begins with. So, a lot of movies do this, where they start, like, at the end or at a certain point in the film, and you have no context, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And that's the whole point. It's to get your attention, so when it goes back, and, when you actually see the film from beginning to end, it makes sense. It's to create intrigue. And that's what they did. At the beginning, this kid is walking in with a guitar, a broken guitar, into a church, and everyone looks back all shocked at him, probably because he's all dirty and has some blood on him. And then they do some weird prayer stuff. They try and do that. They try and like do all the redemption stuff that Christians like to do. uh, you know so the movie actually begins with trying to think what the beginning was. Okay, so it's about these three. So like the film's plot line is about these three gangster people. One of them is there's Smoke and Stack, which are brothers. which I didn't even get the name until I knew the name, but I didn't get that it was a pun until later into the movie, and I was like, oh yeah, smokestack. I don't know why that took me so long, but it did. And then they have a third guy, and I'm trying to remember his name. It had something to do with the fact his father was a pastor. But I don't remember his name. It was like... I'm trying to remember. What was it? I don't remember. But they go by their nicknames throughout the entirety of the movie. I don't think they ever say their real names, unless their nicknames aren't nicknames, and those are their real names. If so, weird. But, yeah. And there's this... So, oh, I should also bring up, I forgot about this part, and the reason why it should become obvious when I talk about it. I forgot about the intro. The intro basically means nothing. The intro it talks about like how there are people that use their guitar to like talk with spirits and stuff. And it's like, and and I thought that it would come up, and it came up like once, and then only once. It was really weird. Well, one time other than the intro, obviously. Of course, music was still part of the film, but not in the way that the intro kind of set it up. And that, I would say, that's a decent complaint about it, but not something huge. So what they do is they get this homeless guy, I think he's homeless, and who plays the harmonica, so they can set up a duo together, him and the guy that I can't remember the name of, so that way they can have a party. And that's exactly what they do. They go to this, I don't really know what it is, if it's like a barn or just a big house, I don't know, but it's something. And they drive there. Oh, this takes place in 1935, I think. 35? Yeah. The film itself takes place in like October, I think it was like 20-something. Yep, it's October. It doesn't really matter when. But it takes place in October, and yeah. And so they get to the house, and the vampires happen. And I'm going to go ahead and go back and explain the vampires, because the vampires thing is kind of set up weird. Like, they start out at one point, and then, like, later, they come back way later. Because the vampires being in this film is, like, kind of, it feels secondary. It feels like they just added that in so they could put them in at the end. It feels kind of like that. It's not necessarily like that. It just doesn't feel right. But yeah. So the vampires first show up in this, as I said, there's this guy that comes up to a shack, and he talks about, like, something about killing his wife. I don't really remember, and I didn't really hear what he said either. And the two of them let him in, which, it's a vampire movie where the whole point of the vampires is that they can only come in with invitations. So you could probably guess why that's a bad move. The guy turns out to be a vampire. And he drinks the blood of the woman's husband that let him in, and then drinks her blood, and all three of them are vampires. Yeah, so now I can continue with the, vampire stuff. So, when all three of them try to join in at the party, and because they're white, they aren't let in. They're like, sorry, you can't come in. And they point out that there's a white girl at the party, and the white girl is let in because she banged one of the people in, like, the group, in, like, the trio. And also she's mixed race. She's not, like, actually white. Not that that matters, but it matters to a movie that focuses so much on race. Not in a racist way, just in a kind of matter of fact. This is how it was in the 30s kind of way. So it doesn't come off as annoying when watching the film. And yeah, so in the 1930s, so what was I saying? Oh, so they were like, so they weren't let in because they were white, right? They are white, and they were kicked out. Not kicked out, they weren't let in the first place. And they, what happens is the white girl, I didn't quite catch a lot of their names, by the way, so I'm gonna refer to them as, like, if I don't know their name, which I only know, like, the name of 2 characters, I'll just say something I associate with them. So the white girl goes out and talks to the vampires just to see, like, what's up, see if they're actually bad, if they should be let in. And obviously they're vampires, so the answer is no. They talk about these coins, which, like, essentially never come up again. They come up, like, one more time, like, slightly later, in, like, a very minor way. And that's another problem, too. There's actually a good few things in the film that are mentioned once and then literally never again. It's really weird. Well, when I say literally never again, I mean, like, they don't really come back in, like, a important or interesting way. You know? And it could just be, you know, I'm used to movies doing Chekhov's gun type stuff. But still, I think, you know, that I'm used to that for a good reason, you know? So they hand her these coins, and they never end up biting her to turn her into a vampire. So it implies that them giving her the coins turned her into a vampire. Because later on, when she's banging one of the guys, she starts drooling, which is what the vampires do. And they want to go, these other 2 people, the other 2 members of the trio, have something to tell him. They go in to talk to him. Well, the smaller one goes in to try and talk to him, notices that he's banging someone, and so just closes the door and walks away. Tells the other guy that. The other guy says, I don't care what they're doing, we need to tell him this, or ask him this, or whatever it was. So they go in anyway, you know, and rather than, and rather than the eating that is supposed to happen during sex, it instead is her eating his neck and drinking his blood. So that happens, and they they try and shoot at her, and then she just gets back up and, you know, runs away or walks away or something, because she's a vampire. That's how vampires work. You know, and yeah, so that other guy that was bit, he was, so when vampires become vampires in the film, one, the bites on their necks are huge. They're not like the stereotypical 2 holes for the fangs type bite. They're huge, like an actual vampire bat. I liked the 2 holes in the neck thing. For the stereotype, I like that just because it feels like, to me, it feels like it creates a sort of idea of how vampire anatomy would work. It creates this idea in my head of, like, that they, like, suck things in through their fangs. But, you know, not everyone has to do with what's established by, you know, the media about whatever monster they're portraying. And, yeah, so they bring that, so they have the monsters, so the vampires, they all are outside, and so they have to be invited in. One strange thing is because the vampires are like immortal minus, obviously the big deals, sunlight and garlic, and for some reason silver bullets. I don't really know why they think werewolf stuff works on vampires. I've seen that in this movie, and I've also heard about it being put in a different vampire movie, and I don't know what it is with people pretending that vampires are the ones killed by silver bullets. That's werewolves. So, if they're immortal to everything except for garlic and silver bullets and sunlight, my question is, why did she leave? Why did she leave the building? Why didn't she just attack? Here, the other way. There we go. Why didn't she just attack the dudes? Everyone in the house. Catch him off guard. Like she already was doing when they walked in and she was, eating the guy's blood. Which is not the type of DNA that you should be eating during sex. So, so she, why didn't she take him by surprise? She could have just attacked all of them and they would have no idea what the fuck's going on. Instead, she leaves so she can only come back when she's invited back in, which is really weird and strange. I don't get it. Oh yeah, also holy water. That's another weakness of theirs that comes up literally once and only once. And that's entirely true for this one. It's not even hyperbolic. With the other ones, it was kind of hyperbolic. It does come back in very small ways with those other ones, like the coins and stuff. But nope. The holy water thing comes in once and then never again, and it's really weird. The movie does that. It creates these things that are they're like Chekhov's guns that shoot blanks. That it's really weird. So the guy is in so the guy's corpse is just laying there. The other guy's kind of mourning him because they're brothers. This is, I think, Smoke who died, and then Stack is the one mourning him, although it could be the other way around. And so the guy who's guarding the door, because as you know, every party needs to have a door guard. You can't just let people walk in, because obviously fun is for only the group of people I say can have it. So yeah, they have a door guard, and he says he needs to go pee, and he does. He walks out, he goes pee, and then he gets attacked by the vampires, obviously. Then he comes back, to come back in to say, hey, I need to continue guarding the door. And he says a lot of really, he's very insistent about coming in, making it almost, making it annoyingly obvious that he's a vampire. Which is, to us, yeah, we already know that. But, they don't, and that's the point. He's trying to get in. Wouldn't it make more sense to just be a normal dude? Just say, hey, I'm back, and then come in. Because it's it's just weird. Why is he acting that way? It just reveals who he is. Yeah. But yeah, so he does that, and one of the guys inside the house, because he's a fucking idiot, I guess, he reaches out with his hand, and the guy bites his hand, which is really weird. I don't know why he reaches out. I don't remember why, at least. I think the guy... Oh, I remember what it was. So the guy asks for something from the... He's a fat Asian dude, by the way, who I'm talking about. who's the vampire in the scene. And he's like, I think he wants something from him. And he goes like, hey, just give me that, but like, you're not going to come in. So he puts his hand out, he gets bitten, and yeah. He doesn't turn into a vampire for some reason. It's possible that it's not being bitten that turns you, it's just being killed, but still weird. So yeah, they go there. So they stay in the building trying to hide from the vampires. And while they're hiding, the vampires are all very happily singing with each other. You know, dancing around, having fun, and stuff. Which leads me into a point I have about the vampires, but I'm going to get to that probably near the end. Just because it's kind of more of an overarching thing, more than a thing I can just bring up individually. Yeah. So, they, hide from the vampires, they grab garlic. Oh my god. I hate when my vape pen gets clogged. But, time to continue. So, they grab garlic, holy water, and all the shit that they need to take on vampires. And you know what they wouldn't have had time to do if the girl just attacked them instead of running away for some reason? You know, they wouldn't have time to grab all this stuff. There's also this one weird lady that I don't even think is like... I don't remember her being in earlier parts of the film, and she's just kind of there to be like, this is how vampires work, which is like kind of annoying. If I knew when I could look up when Dracula was written, you know, maybe that would help me understand, because maybe if it was written before then, I think it was in like the late 18 something, right? So it's possible she knows that from reading that or something, but it's like, why is she here? And also, wouldn't that be more interesting? Have them take on the vampires and have to discover what it is? But I guess then you couldn't have the movie take place in a house when they're surrounded by vampires. Because, you know, obviously, if they don't know how the vampires work, they can't fight back. So, you know, they're just entirely fucked as opposed to very likely fucked. Yeah, so they're singing, and so the vampires are singing and having fun, and the brother, he gets up and asks to be let out of the room, because remember, as I said, they're the type that require invitations. And I guess it's not a building thing, it's a room thing. You don't get let into the building, you get let into the room. So, because obviously if he was just if it's just being let into the building, he could just open the door and walk through, because it's just another part of the building. But instead of doing, you know, what any person would do and try to logically convince him to like let him out, he just kind of like slams his head against the door and like threatens him and shit. He also stabs the door with a knife. I don't really remember if that knife was even in the room to begin with, and if it was, then like when was it established, because I don't remember. And I'm genuinely asking. If the comments can answer that, that'd be cool. But if it wasn't established, that's another problem. It's the same Chekhov's gun problem, but the other way around. Rather than something being introduced and never coming up again, or only coming up in very minor ways, it's not introduced and it just kind of exists. And I'd say that second one is far worse, because the first one can be just kind of brushed off as a bit annoying. But that second one is genuinely an issue. You have to establish things that exist. You can't just have it appear. So, I don't remember how he gets out of the room. But he does, and someone throws holy water on him. He runs out the building and stuff, you know? Another thing that they did, because they were given time to prepare, because the vampire lady was not, smart. So he ran out and he joins the fun that the vampires are having. He starts dancing and singing with them, and they do like jigs and stuff. It's really cool. It looks genuinely really fun. As I've said, this is going to lead into a bigger point later. My emphasis on how much fun the vampires are very clearly having. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. What's the next thing that happens? They So the people in the building, they talk about like how they talk about like how vampires work. One of the things they bring up is that like vampires, their souls are trapped in their bodies, after death, unlike a normal person who goes to heaven or something, which is like, something that sounds bad to a Christian, but when you don't believe in any of this shit, it's just like, okay, well, what's the problem then? Because it's like, I don't really see the problem with immortality. Like, I get it in that, like, you'll outlive everyone, but, like, so what? Like, you can move on. You can just find new people. And plus, vampires aren't entirely immortal. They're just mostly immortal. If I ever got bored, if I were a vampire and I got bored of it, I could just walk out, have, like, just a seat. Like, I could just make a soda with holy water and drink it and then die. It's very easy to commit suicide as a vampire. So the immortality is only as permanent as you make it. And also as permanent as other people make it, because obviously if you provoke others and they know you're a vampire, they can fight back. The funny thing is I don't remember any of the vampires dying. So a lot of the anti-vampire stuff works more as a repellent than a preventative measure, and I don't know if that's on purpose or not. It seems on purpose. The silver bullets worked about as well as the regular bullets, so I don't even know why those were introduced. They could have just said they were shooting regular bullets, but I guess that would just make them look retarded because they already saw earlier on that bullets did nothing. But if they said, oh, the silver bullets work, then them shooting at them makes slightly more sense. But yeah. So one of the things that happen is the vampire leader guy, goes up to the door. He talks to them, specifically the brother guy, and he explains like how exactly the vampires work from the vampire's perspective, explaining that they can hear each other's thoughts, which I've seen online people say like stuff about it being like a hive mind type thing, which is kind of a weird assumption to make. That's not what that means. Everyone in a group being telepathic with one another doesn't mean it's a hive mind. That's something that it seems like they're coming up with just so they can say the vampires, just so they can give the vampires one other bad thing, because spoilers for later in this video, I'm going to talk about how I don't think the vampires were entirely in the wrong. They were in a decent amount of ways, but not in every way. So they, and heck, it seemed kind of like the point was that was on purpose. And if that was on purpose and this isn't, then that's not a criticism. That's a good thing. But if it wasn't, then it is a criticism. So they lean in and they talk. The leader guy leans in and he's like, you guys should become vampires because the guy you're working for is a member of the KKK. He's going to stab you in the back. Like, what has the world done for you? What have they done? They've beaten you down. They've they've enslaved your ancestors. They essentially enslave you, although not, literally, and stuff like that. He brings up a bunch of good points about why they should become vampires. And rather than, thinking logically like a human being, they're just like, no. And it's funny because it's very clear, like, their reasoning for no isn't like, for saying no, isn't like a logic thing or like a morality thing. Instead, it's because the vampire guy says he's the devil, the leader of them, I mean. And they're like, oh, well, no, we'd never work for the devil. And it's like, which is dumb for multiple reasons. One, like, why are you just assuming the devil has bad, like, intentions? Just because your book says shit doesn't mean it's true. Like, the Bible could be partially true, like the devil could exist, but it could be entirely reversed morally. It could have been written by God as like a hit piece against Satan. So, like, you shouldn't make that assumption. But Christians will, and always will, make that assumption no matter what, just because they're not open-minded to the idea that their book is partially wrong. They're not even open-minded to the idea that their book is entirely wrong. So, yeah. And that's, what sucks. Although the movie doesn't seem like mega pro-religious or anything, it just seems like that's just because your assumption, that's probably just because the general audience's assumption is the devil is bad, even though there's literally no reason to assume that. We just assume that because we say the devil is bad and then we move on. We have no reason to say that other than that's what the Bible portrays. And I don't take what books portray people as, or movies or shows or video games or any form of art, what they portray people as at face value. What they portray people as is just what they portray them as. They could still be in the right. A great example of this is, I think it's in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the second Captain America. A lot of people really like him because, like, his mistakes are very easy to explain. They aren't things that like a bad person would do. They're things like a good person in like a bad situation would do, and he gives them a lot of good, like, he says a lot of stuff, but not my point. My main point is just, I don't judge bad guys as bad until they show they're bad. And I think that's an important thing in films. You can't just say this character's Satan or this character's evil. You have to show they're evil. You can't just say they are and hope I believe you. Because, there's no reason to assume that the characters are in the wrong. Like, if they were Nosferatu-type vampires, where when they drank blood, they killed their victims. Or, well, I guess in the film it would be victims, because I don't consider them victims. They seem like they entirely benefit from the transformation. But yeah. So they seem like individuals. Like that they have separate thoughts. It's just that they can feel each other's thoughts, so there's no secrets between them. And they, and their point about the guy working for the KKK and stuff like that, it's like, those are good points. Like, why not just join the vampires? I don't see the problem. They also show them to be mega happy outside, playing around with each other, listening, playing music and stuff and singing. It's like they give every indication that the vampires are having an amazing time and that they have the power to fix all of the problems. And it's like, and then we're just supposed to assume they're bad because the main guy says he's the devil. And keep in mind, even if you just go with the generic Christian stuff of saying the devil is evil no matter what, without creating a nuanced interpretation of the character from the Bible, you still have to assume the guy's telling the truth, The vampire guy could be lying. He could be saying that just as a scare tactic, which doesn't make sense in context, which is why it comes off as true. But that doesn't mean it is true. As I said, there's a good amount of things in the film I don't really, that are a bit weird. So, just because it makes sense in context to assume that doesn't mean it's true. Yeah. And I was kind of thinking throughout the movie, because of the way the vampires were portrayed, that the point was going to be that the vampires were in the right, and that they were going to eventually join, or that they were all going to fail to stop them, and then as a result, like, they were either going to join willingly or not. That's what I thought was going to be the point. They were either going to deliberately be like, you know what, you're right, and just walk out, or say, or they try to fight back and fail miserably, which is essentially what happens anyway. They only win because the sun happens to come up near the end of the film. The sun happens to time itself correctly where they can, not be killed. And yeah, So, what happens is there's this one moment where this woman talks about, like, how her brother was taken by the vampires, or someone says something about, like, someone being taken by the vampires. I don't remember who it was. And then she gets really mad and she says, "Come in, you motherfuckers," or something like that. Like, trying to get him to come in so she can, like, I don't know, attempt and fail to kick their ass. I get that human emotions aren't logical, so obviously that's not actually a criticism, me saying that. That's just a joke. Yeah, so they, being invited by her, all rush in at once. And, they... keep in mind, I could be misremembering certain details, and I'm not completely confident about if I'm remembering the person correctly, so it may not even be a her. I'm just saying her because that's what I remember. They come in, being invited by her and stuff, and the guy fights his brother. And, yeah. And what's really weird is, like, the vampires, so it's established that they can live through bullets, right? So couldn't they just kind of, like, attack and go out of their way to just, like, kind of brute force their way through? Like, couldn't they just, like, I don't know, just, like, beat them until they stop fighting back? And also, like, you also have the fact that, like, if they came earlier in the night, because, like, they could have came earlier in the night and they would have been fine too. They would have also had more time. I hate how I'm so much better at planning than I would say they are, because obviously in universe it's the vampires that suck, but it's the writer of the film. That's the problem here. Or they realized that problem and they just made that mistake anyway, because they were like, well, good, fun film better than good film, was the guy's logic. I don't know. And yeah, they fight. Eventually, they get shot up and all run away because some fire thing is thrown at them, something that's lit on fire. And yeah, they so eventually, the smaller guy, he falls out a balcony and gets pulled outside by the vampires and gets picked up by the leader. And you might say, oh, so they're gonna, like, immediately bite his neck and turn him into a vampire and then just kind of walk away or walk in the building and continue fighting. Nope. He just kind of holds him and talks to him about stuff. And then the guy, he, like, he's, like, holding onto his guitar, and he, like, hits it against the guy's head. And you might think, well, he's a vampire, it's going to do literally nothing. The issue is it doesn't do literally nothing. I don't really know how it does what it does, but the metal disc on his guitar breaks off and gets stuck in the guy's head, and it, like, burns him. And I don't really know why. I didn't pay enough attention to know what symbols are on the disc, so if it was like a cross or something, then I guess that would make sense. But I don't remember. As I said, I want to look up. There's a good few things I could look up to answer these questions, but they're not big enough because I'm not going to criticize the film on like what symbols were on the thing. What I'm going to criticize the film on is not really setting that up at all. Even if that is a cross, even if it does have a cross on it or something, they should have set that up in some way. The only thing that I could think of as a sort of setup is the fact that they emphasize music as being magical, and so they could say by extension the guitar is, which is like, that's not quite true. Like music is not the instrument. They're not really related. The instrument is just what makes the sound. The sound is the music. I don't know, but I don't know. Movie logic can be weird like that. So yeah, eventually the sun comes up while he's holding him and talking to him for like 20 minutes, and then they all set on fire and die because they were too stupid to just bite him and walk away. So they, so all of them, so the small guy, we see the scene we saw at the beginning where he walks into the church and they tell him, drop the guitar because blues is considered like the devil's music or some bullshit like that. And he's like, drop the guitar or something like that. The father, the pastor, the what the fuck ever. And after that scene is done, it cuts away to him driving away with the broken guitar next to him, implying that no, he didn't drop the guitar. He just was an adult and was like, music is music. I don't need to assume this type of music is bad just because a book says so, or just because my pastor does, or whatever. Which I think is a good thing to point out. Religion isn't always correct. And it's not even religion, because blues being bad isn't something in the Bible, obviously. It's something made up by pastors. That's a thing that's been happening for generations. Every time there's a new form of music, if it's vaguely controversial, then Christians are going to use it against, others. They're going to say it's the devil's music or something like that. And what's funny is because the U.S. is majority Christian, that does mean not only it's essentially Christians arguing with Christians. There are a good few atheists who listen to music and stuff that's in their generation was called bad or satanic or whatever, but a lot of them were Christians also. So it's just kind of funny. It's almost as if religion is created only to divide, and never to unify. Like it pretends to be. It pretends to be there to unify, but it's always there to divide. It unifies a group of people and then divides them from every other group. And it's like, I think that second part is not worth that first part. So, but yeah. So it cuts later, during the credits, and we see him as an old man playing blues music or something on stage. He goes and he sits down at some bar or whatever, and two of the vampires, the white lady and the guy's brother, Stack or Smoke, one of them, they both walk up and they talk to him and they say, some stuff, saying that they could make him live forever, obviously, because they're vampires and they can turn him into a vampire, and he refuses, and they respect him and leave. Yeah, it's overall a good film, but like the minor details are kind of a problem. So as a result, what I would say is, like, when watching the film, it was fun. But when thinking about the film, it becomes a lot less good, and it's not in a way of like, it's not like, say, and it's not like in ways that like make the film bad. It's just ways that make the film less good, you know? There was this other really weird element, you know, other really weird thing. So, you know how I was pointing out that like the film like sets stuff up and then it never appears again, and then also with the knife how it never set that up in the first place. There's actually a similar issue of them setting something up that like means nothing anyway, which is like I don't really want to get demonetized, not that I am monetized, but when I become monetized I don't want this to be one of them that isn't. So there's this running thing about like eating, let's say eating women, I guess is a good way to put it. That's kid friendly enough for YouTube not to freak out. And it comes out of nowhere, and it's just kind of like, I didn't even know what they were talking about when they first started talking about it. I was like, what are they talking about? And then I thought, are they talking about what it sounds like? And then I was like, no. And then I was like, wait a minute, no, they are. And then that came up like 2 other times, and I was like, huh. And I don't really know why that came up so many times. It didn't matter. Like, honestly, that dialogue could have been used for other stuff. It could have been used for characterization. It could have been used to set up, I don't know, set up the knife. It could have been used to, like, make the coins be useful. Set them up earlier and then have them come back. You know, have the parts where they're introduced be the part that was being set up by an earlier part that could have been added, you know, or something like that. The vampires, another major problem, or minor problem, I don't really know. As I said, the movie's fun, and maybe if I rewatch it, I'll change my mind, but, you know, so far, a lot of the problems I've thought of in my, you know, aren't bad enough to make the movie overall become bad in my eyes. But, yeah, they're basically, the major problem with the film is like a Chekhov's gun type issue. They set up stuff they don't need to, they don't set up stuff they do need to, and they set up stuff without paying it off, which is like a big kind of a problem, you know, that I don't really like, you know, as are all problems, you know, most people don't like problems. Anyway, yeah, so they, so it's, so as I was saying before about the vampires, I just don't get why they're the bad guys. Like, they don't kill people, they just bring them back, but immortal. And it's not like they're a hive mind. They don't really seem like a hive mind. They seem like they have like minds that are tied together. You know, they're not like a hive mind. They're not one large brain inhabiting multiple bodies. They're a bunch of brains that are connected. You know, they're individuals, but they're not like, but they also can communicate telepathically and stuff. You know, and they're a bit more unified than they would be otherwise. They also give really good reasons for the other characters to turn into vampires. And, like, I don't get why they don't give a reason. You know, why? Like, they don't really give a reason why not. They just give a reason why to. As I said, this could easily be on purpose. So this could be a criticism. It could be a benefit of the movie. It could be a thing that's done on purpose, a compliment. But if it isn't done intentionally, that's a problem, because you're supposed to make your bad guys the bad guys. Unless you're doing some sort of, you know, unless you're doing a sort of deal where you make both sides look good in some ways and bad in others, which I guess could be interpreted as what the film is, but I don't really know. It doesn't feel like it. And yeah. And one other issue is, like, the earlier point of the film, kind of the point before the vampires felt really weird. It felt like off. It didn't feel right. It felt like they were just kind of like padding time for the vampires to happen, you know? And that may have been it, given that obviously the vampire section's in one building, so spending the entire movie there might not be a good idea. And I say might not just because it would make it slightly more difficult to make. Because, you know, for example, 12 Angry Men, I think is what it's called. Or 12... Yeah, I think that's what it's called. It's about a jury of people deciding the fate of someone. That's entirely in one room because it's about a jury and the jury's in that one room making a decision. So it's not impossible. I've seen that film and I've read the book. They're both fine. It's great. Yeah. But it felt weird. It felt like padding. Like they didn't... Like a lot of the stuff they talked about earlier on didn't come back later, which is, again, another problem. You know? It really felt like they were waiting to get to the vampires. Keep in mind that this could just be a subconscious thing. It could be I was waiting to get to the vampires, so that's just how I interpreted the earlier scenes. But that combined with the fact that, like, I couldn't quite understand what they were saying throughout the movie, it kind of created this idea of just, like, now I'm just watching the film for the vampires. Because, like, yeah, I want to listen to what the characters are saying, but I have no idea what the fuck they're saying. You also have the fact that, like, they have, one of them has like a dead son that's brought up once and only once, and I don't know why this is such a reoccurring theme. Heck, they could have made a show. They could have made this a show, and then that way they could have kept doing that. Like, they could have kept introducing stuff, and that way they could still fulfill what they introduced. You know, they regularly talk about moving to Chicago, talking about stuff like there being no Jim Crow laws and stuff like that, which I don't know if that was true back then. I'd assume it was bullshit, because I'd assume there's nowhere that wasn't safe from that bullshittery. The bullshittery that was Jim Crow. But it's also possible that I'm wrong. And that could, you know, and that at least sort of came back, but not in a way that really mattered. It was like light setup for when the guy moves to Chicago when he gets really old. You know, so it's like not really like that important. And yeah. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it. That's all I have to say. Is that the main problem is it sets up a lot of stuff without paying it off. It doesn't set up stuff before using the thing that should have been set up. It sets up stuff that doesn't really need to be like a Chekhov's gun. You know, it doesn't... It seems like the guy is like rolling dice, trying to figure out what should and shouldn't be a Chekhov's gun, and it just happened to land on like the exactly wrong answer to that question, which, you know, and yeah. So yeah, I thought the film was okay, but there were a lot of things I didn't like, you know, that were small enough where I would still say the film is cool. I would still say it's worth watching, but not really for the story, more so just because the vampires are awesome. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just... Well, that's everything, I guess, isn't it? So, well, there was also some other smaller dumb stuff I guess I should name real quick before I end the video. So, there was two tiny things my grandma noticed, which was kind of dumb. And I noticed one of them. And she noticed that, like, the snake being in the back of that truck didn't make much sense. You know, how did it get up there? That it just, like, do, like, a high jump, like, you know, like, I don't know how it did that. You also have the fact that, like, when they're talking to the brother through the door, they both, the smaller black guy and the bigger other black guy, they both, like, keep looking through the hole where the knife was, and they keep putting their head, like, right up close to the door. You know, and it's like, why are you doing that? He just established he had a knife. You're gonna get stabbed in the eye. You know, that could also be used as a point in the vampire's favor, as like that was an easy way to like kill them and they didn't, because their goal maybe not is not to kill them, it's to convert them into vampires. You know, it shows their goals. And yeah, so my main point is just the film is decent. It's good enough. I would recommend it, but not for the story, just for the visuals. It's fun to watch, not really fun to like watch, you know? It's fun to look at, not fun to watch, you know, I guess is a good way to put it. Kind of like the distinction between hearing and listening. So, yeah, that's it. Bye.